While wine-drunk with her friends, she said, "I could do so much better than him. Marriage? No." The champagne bottle made a satisfying pop as David twisted the cork free, careful to aim it away from the French doors leading to his apartment balcony. 27 floors up, the city stretched out beneath him like a circuit board of flickering lights and dreams. He poured 2 glasses, the bubbles rising in elegant streams, and checked his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Marcus would be here any minute with the rest of the setup. This was it, the night he'd been planning for 3 months, the night he'd asked Jennifer to be his wife. Hello friends, before I continue the story, please support the channel by becoming a subscriber and giving the video a like. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching right now. He'd met her 18 months ago at a corporate mixer he'd almost skipped. She'd been standing near the hors d'oeuvres table, looking bored in a red dress that commanded every eye in the room. He'd made some joke about the sad state of the shrimp cocktail, and she'd really laughed, not the polite titter people gave at networking events. They'd talked for 3 hours while the party dissolved around them. When she'd given him her number, scrawled on a cocktail napkin, he'd felt like he'd won the lottery. Now, a year and a half later, he was ready to make it permanent. The ring was hidden in his desk drawer, a vintage Art Deco piece he'd found after visiting 12 different jewelers. Jennifer had an expensive taste, she'd made that clear early on, laughing about her champagne preferences on a beer budget. David didn't mind. He made good money as a software architect, and watching her face light up when he surprised her with something beautiful was worth every penny. The pearl earrings for her birthday, the weekend in Napa for their anniversary, the designer handbag she'd been eyeing for months, which he'd presented to her just because. She'd kissed him so passionately that night, whispering that he was too good to her. Tonight was supposed to be casual, just Jennifer having her monthly wine night with her 3 closest friends while David worked late at the office. Except he wasn't working late. He'd left at noon, telling his team he had a personal emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie when you considered that proposing to the woman you loved constituted a life-altering event. Marcus, his best friend since college, was bringing the final piece of the surprise. A custom neon sign that read, "Forever starts tonight," in soft pink light. The plan was simple. Wait until Jennifer's friends left around 9, then transform the living room into a proposal wonderland before she could finish her last glass of wine. David set the champagne in the ice bucket and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. He could see his reflection superimposed over the city. A 32-year-old man with prematurely graying temples and smile lines that Jennifer said made him look distinguished. He'd worn his good shirt today, the blue one she'd picked out for him at Nordstrom. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Running 10 minutes late. Traffic is hell. Don't propose without me, you magnificent bastard." David smiled, typing back a thumbs-up emoji, and returned to arranging the rose petals he'd scattered across the coffee table. The apartment was silent except for the ambient hum of the city filtering through the windows. Jennifer's place was across town, a trendy loft in the arts district that she shared with her friend Vanessa. She'd invited him to move in together twice, but David had hesitated, old-fashioned enough to want marriage first. Jennifer had rolled her eyes and called him a romantic dinosaur, but she'd smiled when she said it. Tonight would make the wait worth it. Tonight, he'd get down on one knee and offer her everything he had. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Jennifer. "Wine night moved to your place. Hope that's okay. We wanted more space and Vanessa's AC is broken. Be there in 20. Love you." David's heart rate spiked. The apartment was already set up for a proposal, not a wine night. Rose petals everywhere. Champagne chilling. Candles lined up on every flat surface. He looked around in mild panic, then forced himself to breathe. It was fine. He'd tell them he was having a romantic evening planned for later and quickly hide the obvious evidence. The neon sign wasn't here yet. He could improvise. He was shoving rose petals into a kitchen drawer when he heard Jennifer's key in the lock. They'd exchanged keys 3 months ago, a small commitment that had felt enormous at the time. The door swung open and Jennifer swept in, followed by Vanessa, Chloe, and Amber, the trinity of friends she'd known since college. They were already laughing, already loud, carrying bottles of wine like merchants bringing tribute. Jennifer spotted him and her face registered surprise, then delight. "David, I thought you were working late." She crossed the room and kissed him, tasting mint gum and the beginning of a buzz. "I was," he lied smoothly, "but I wrapped up early. I didn't know you were coming here." He smiled at the other women, who were already making themselves at home, kicking off heels and claiming corners of the sectional sofa. Vanessa, tall and sharp, gave him a little wave. Chloe, perpetually anxious and clutching her phone like a lifeline, nodded. Amber, the loud one with the infectious energy, was already opening a bottle. "Hope you don't mind us crashing," Jennifer said, hanging her jacket on the back of a chair. Vanessa's place is like a sauna and Chloe's landlord is doing construction. "Not at all," David said, still calculating how to salvage the evening. "I'll just give you ladies some space. I have some work I can finish in the office." He gestured toward the small room he'd converted into a home office. Jennifer squeezed his hand, already distracted by Amber pouring wine into the glasses he'd set out for champagne. "You're the best," she said absently, her attention shifting to her friends. David retreated, closing the office door behind him, and sent Marcus a frantic text. "Abort, abort, abort. They're here. At my place." Marcus replied immediately, "What do you want me to do with the sign?" David typed back, "Bring it to the side entrance. I'll sneak it in later." He sat at his desk, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation bleeding through the walls. This wasn't how he'd planned it, but he could adapt. Let them have their wine night. Once they left, he'd deploy the sign, relight the candles, and still have his perfect moment. He opened his laptop and pretended to work, responding to emails he'd already answered. Anything to pass the time. An hour crept by. The voices in the living room grew louder, looser, the unmistakable sound of inhibitions dissolving in alcohol. David caught fragments of conversation about a nightmare client at Vanessa's marketing firm, Chloe's disaster of a dating life, Amber's upcoming trip to Morocco. He smiled. Jennifer's friends were important to her, and he'd worked hard to be the kind of boyfriend, soon-to-be fiancé, who understood that women needed their time away from men. He'd gotten good at making himself scarce, at being unobtrusive, at supporting Jennifer's independence while still being present when she needed him. His phone lit up with a message from Marcus. "I'm downstairs with the sign. This thing is heavier than it looks." David cracked the office door and peered out. The women were deep in conversation, Jennifer refilling glasses with expensive Pinot Grigio. He slipped out quietly, moving through the apartment like a ghost, and made it to the front door without being noticed. He texted Marcus to meet him at the service elevator, the one used for deliveries and furniture. This was getting complicated, but that was fine. Love was complicated. Marriage was complicated. What mattered was the intention behind it. The service elevator doors opened and Marcus stood there, grinning, holding a 4-foot neon sign wrapped in bubble wrap. "You're insane," he whispered, helping David carry it into the hallway. They maneuvered it through the service entrance, a back way into David's apartment that opened into a storage closet off the kitchen. "When are they leaving?" Marcus asked, carefully setting the sign down. David shrugged. "Jennifer said around 9 usually, but they're on their 3rd bottle. Could be a while." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Godspeed, brother. Text me when she says yes." He left the way he'd come, and David stood in the storage closet, surrounded by cleaning supplies and a neon declaration of forever, wondering if he'd ever felt more ridiculous or more hopeful. He was about to return to the office when he heard his name. Not affectionately, not warmly, but with the kind of casual dismissal you'd use to discuss a piece of furniture you were considering donating. David froze, one hand on the storage closet door, his body hidden in the narrow space between the kitchen and the living room. Through the gap in the door, he could see Jennifer's profile. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, wine glass balanced on her knee, looking relaxed in a way she only looked around her friends. Vanessa was saying something about a guy she'd been seeing, and Jennifer was shaking her head. "At least your guy has some edge," Jennifer said, and her voice had that slur that meant she was well past tipsy. David is, he's sweet, But God, sometimes I feel like I'm dating my accountant. The room erupted in laughter. David's hand tightened on the doorframe. Chloe's voice cut through. But he's stable, Jen. And he worships you. Do you know how rare that is? Jennifer waved her hand dismissively, nearly sloshing wine onto the cream-colored couch David had spent a month's salary on. Stable is just another word for boring, she said. I'm 30 years old and I feel like I'm already living a retirement home life. Amber, always the instigator, leaned forward with a wicked grin. So why stay with him? You've got options. You're gorgeous, you're successful. You could have anyone. David pressed himself against the wall, his breath shallow, waiting for Jennifer to defend him, waiting for her to say what he knew. She felt that love wasn't about edge or excitement, that it was about partnership and trust and building something real. The silence stretched for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then Jennifer laughed, a bright, careless sound that cut through him like glass. Honestly, she said, I've thought about it. Thought about what? Vanessa pressed. Leaving him. Jennifer took a long sip of wine, considering. Not leaving exactly. More like, I don't know, exploring. I feel like I settled too early. David was safe. He was there when I was tired of playing games and dealing with assholes who couldn't commit. He was the responsible choice. She paused, swirling the wine in her glass. But sometimes I wonder what would happen if I just said fuck it and went for someone who made my pulse race instead of someone who makes sure the bills are paid on time. Chloe looked uncomfortable. Jen, that's kind of harsh. It's honest, Jennifer countered, her tone sharpening. I'm not saying David's a bad person. He's wonderful. He's generous and thoughtful, and he'd make an amazing husband and father someday. She said the word someday with a kind of vague distaste, as if she were discussing a dental appointment. But is he the love of my life? Is he the guy I can't live without? I don't know. I think I could do better than him, honestly. Marriage? No thanks. Not yet. Maybe not with him. The room went quiet. David's vision blurred at the edges, his entire body locked in place by the weight of what he'd just heard. Vanessa broke the silence. You're drunk, babe. You don't mean that. Jennifer shrugged. Maybe I'm drunk enough to tell the truth. I'm just saying, if someone more exciting came along, someone with passion and unpredictability, I'm not sure I'd have the willpower to say no. David's a safety net. And safety nets are great until you realize they're keeping you from flying. Amber cackled. So you're saying you want a bad boy? Jennifer grinned. I'm saying I want someone who makes me feel alive. David makes me feel comfortable, and I'm grateful for that. But comfortable isn't the same as happy. David stood in the darkness of the storage closet, surrounded by mops and a glowing neon sign that suddenly felt like a monument to his own stupidity. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, in his fingertips, in the base of his skull. He'd spent 3 months planning this proposal. He'd spent 18 months trying to be the perfect partner, attentive, supportive, present. And in one wine-drunk confession, Jennifer had reduced all of it to comfortable. Not happy, not loved, comfortable, like a pair of old slippers she kept around because they were easier than shopping for new ones. He looked down at the ring box in his pocket, the outline visible through the fabric of his pants. $2,500 for a vintage ring. Months of searching. Hours of agonizing over whether it was perfect enough, special enough, worthy of the woman he thought he'd spend his life with. His hand moved to his phone, still gripping it like a lifeline. He could walk out there right now. He could confront her, demand an explanation, make a scene. But what would that accomplish? She'd cry. She'd apologize. She'd say the wine made her say things she didn't mean. And maybe she'd even believe it herself. Or he could do nothing. He could wait until they left, swallow this humiliation, and pretend he'd never heard any of it. He could propose anyway because maybe she was just having a moment of doubt. Maybe every person in a relationship wondered what else was out there. Maybe this was just cold feet, pre-commitment panic, the fear of permanence that everyone felt. He stood there, paralyzed by options, while the women in the other room moved on to a new topic: Amber's promotion, Vanessa's mother's health scare. Jennifer's confession already forgotten by everyone except the man who'd heard it. David made his decision. He backed away from the door, moving silently through the kitchen. He left the neon sign in the storage closet, a glowing secret that would never see the light of Jennifer's eyes. He walked to the bedroom, careful to avoid the floorboards that creaked, and pulled a duffel bag from the closet. He methodically packed toiletries, a change of clothes, his laptop charger. He moved like a man disarming a bomb, every action slow and deliberate. From the living room, he heard Jennifer laugh at something Amber said, that bright, careless laugh that used to make him feel like the luckiest man alive. He took the ring box from his pocket and set it on the dresser, next to a framed photo of the two of them from their trip to Big Sur. They looked happy in the photo. Maybe they had been happy. Maybe happiness was just another word for ignorance. He picked up a pen and a notepad from the bedside table, hesitated, then wrote a single line. "I hope you find what makes you feel alive." He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. She'd know. He left the note next to the ring box, propped against the picture frame, and walked out of the bedroom for the last time. The apartment was quiet except for the sounds of the wine night continuing in the living room. David moved through the space like a shadow, taking only what he needed, leaving behind everything they'd built together. The furniture they'd picked out, the kitchen gadgets she'd insisted on, the throw pillows that he'd privately thought were excessive but had bought anyway because they made her happy. He realized, standing in the hallway with his duffel bag over his shoulder, that almost everything in this apartment was for her. He'd built his life around making her comfortable, and she'd rewarded him by calling him boring. He reached the front door and paused, his hand on the knob. Through the wall, he could hear Vanessa saying something about a vacation she was planning, and Jennifer responding with animated enthusiasm. She sounded happy. She sounded free. She sounded like a woman who had no idea that the safety net she'd been complaining about was about to disappear. David turned the knob slowly, opened the door just wide enough to slip through, and stepped into the hallway. He closed it behind him with a soft click that sounded, to his ears, like the end of a chapter he'd never wanted to finish. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. David watched the numbers descend 27, 26, 25, each floor a step away from the life he thought he was building. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from Marcus. "How'd it go? Did she cry?" David stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. He typed, "She didn't cry. I didn't ask. I'm done." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The elevator reached the lobby and the doors opened onto the marble-floored entrance where he'd carried Jennifer across the threshold as a joke when they'd first started dating. The night doorman, Luis, looked up from his desk and smiled. "Evening, Mr. Hayes. Heading out?" David nodded, adjusting the duffel bag on his shoulder. "Yeah, just for a bit." Luis's smile faltered slightly, his eyes catching on the bag, the expression on David's face. "Everything all right?" David forced what he hoped was a convincing smile. "Everything's fine. Just need some air." He walked past the desk and out into the cool October night, the city spreading out before him like a map of infinite possibilities and zero destinations. He walked for 3 blocks before he realized he had nowhere to go. His apartment, Jennifer's apartment now, in every way that mattered, was behind him. Marcus lived across town with his wife and newborn, and showing up on their doorstep at 9:30 on a Friday night with a duffel bag and a broken engagement seemed unfair. His parents were 2 states away, and calling them would require explanations he wasn't ready to give. David pulled out his phone and opened a hotel booking app, scrolling through options with numb fingers. He selected the first nice one he saw at a boutique place in the financial district and booked a room for the night. The hotel lobby was all polished concrete and ambient lighting, the kind of aggressively trendy space that Jennifer would have loved. David checked in with mechanical efficiency, accepting the key card from a desk clerk who looked barely old enough to drink. The room was on the 14th floor, minimalist and expensive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city he and Jennifer used to explore together. He dropped his duffel bag on the bed and stood at the window, watching tiny cars navigate the grid of streets below. His phone buzzed. "Marcus, what happened?" David typed out the whole story. The surprise wine night, the overheard conversation, the abandoned proposal. His thumbs moved faster as the anger he'd been suppressing began to surface, each word a small act of catharsis. He hit send and watched the message deliver, 3 dots appearing almost immediately as Marcus typed his response. Holy shit, man. I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over? I can be there in 30. David considered it, then declined. What he needed wasn't company. What he needed was to sit with this grief alone until it transformed into something he could use. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the ring box from his pocket, opening it for what he knew would be the last time. The Art Deco diamond caught the light from the window, throwing tiny rainbows across the white duvet. It really was beautiful. He'd been so proud when he found it, imagining it on Jennifer's finger, imagining her showing it off to these same friends who just heard her call him boring. He snapped the box shut and set it on the nightstand, then lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Jennifer. Having so much fun. Thanks for being cool about us invading your space. Love you, Redheart. David stared at the message for a long time. She had no idea. She was sitting in his apartment, drinking his wine, laughing with her friends about how she could do better, and she had no idea that her entire future had just changed. Part of him wanted to text back something cutting, something that would hurt her the way she'd hurt him. But a larger part of him, the part that had loved her genuinely, completely couldn't do it. He turned off his phone without responding and closed his eyes, letting the exhaustion of the evening wash over him. Tomorrow he would figure out the logistics. Tonight he would just survive. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams where he walked into the living room and Jennifer laughed in his face, where he opened the ring box and found it empty, where he stood at the altar and she never showed up. He woke at 6 a.m. to pale sunlight filtering through the hotel curtains, his body stiff from sleeping in his clothes. For 3 disoriented seconds, he forgot where he was. Then memory crashed back like a wave, and he groaned, pressing his palms against his eyes. His phone, still turned off from the night before, sat on the nightstand next to the ring box. He reached for it with the grim inevitability of a man checking a wound. 43 missed calls, 67 text messages, 12 voicemails. David's stomach turned. He scrolled through the notifications, most from Jennifer, several from Vanessa, a few from numbers he didn't recognize. The texts from Jennifer tracked her emotional trajectory like a seismograph. Confusion at 11 p.m. Where did you go? Annoyance at midnight. This isn't funny, David. I'm worried. Panic at 2 a.m. Please just tell me you're okay. And finally, rage at 6:30 a.m. I found the note. What the hell is wrong with you? We need to talk. Now. He opened the voicemail from 3 a.m. Jennifer's voice slurred and tearful. I don't understand what I did wrong. Please come home. What she did wrong. David almost laughed. She still didn't get it. Or maybe she got it and was playing dumb, hoping he'd been too drunk or too stupid to remember what he'd heard. He deleted the voicemail without listening to the others. There was also a message from Vanessa, time-stamped at 7:15 a.m. David, I need to tell you something. When I left your place last night, I saw you in the parking garage getting into your car. You looked destroyed. I think you heard us, didn't you? You heard what Jen said. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, she was drunk and stupid, and I don't think she meant it the way it sounded. Except she had meant it exactly the way it sounded. David had learned over the years that drunk people don't lie, they just stop filtering the truth. Sober Jennifer was diplomatic, careful, aware of how her words landed. Drunk Jennifer said what she really thought, what lived beneath the performance of their relationship. And what she really thought was that David was a placeholder, a comfortable default setting until someone better came along. He typed a response to Vanessa. Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it. But I think Jen was more honest last night than she's been in months. I'm not angry. I'm just done. He hit send before he could soften it. The next text went to Jennifer. I'm fine. I'm safe. I need some space to think. Please don't call or text for a few days. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk. It was more courtesy than she deserved, but David had been raised to be civil even in crisis. He silenced his phone and tossed it onto the bed, then stood and walked to the window. The city was waking up, joggers on the sidewalks, coffee shops opening their doors, the morning shift of people who kept the world running. Yesterday he'd been one of them, just another guy in love, planning a future. Today he was something else, something untethered. He showered in the hotel bathroom, letting the hot water run longer than necessary, steam filling the small space until he could barely see his own outline in the mirror. When he finally emerged, skin pink and raw, he felt marginally more human. He dressed in the clean clothes he'd packed, jeans and a gray Henley, and checked out of the hotel. The desk clerk asked if he'd enjoyed his stay. "Unforgettable," David said, and he meant it in the worst possible way. He walked out into the cool morning, duffel bag over his shoulder, and realized he still had nowhere to go. He ended up at a diner 3 blocks away, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. He ordered eggs and toast and forced himself to eat, even though everything tasted like cardboard. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a name tag that read Dolores, refilled his coffee without being asked. "Rough night," she said, and it wasn't prying, just human. David nodded. "Rough couple of years, apparently. I just didn't know it." Dolores patted his shoulder. "Whatever it is, honey, you'll survive it. We always do." He wanted to believe her. He sat in that diner for 2 hours, drinking coffee and watching the world move past the window. Couples walked by holding hands. A man argued with someone on his phone. A kid chased a pigeon down the sidewalk. Normal life, continuing as if David's personal apocalypse hadn't just occurred. His phone buzzed Jennifer again, trying to bypass his request for space. He turned it face down and signaled Dolores for more coffee. She brought the pot over and topped him off. "You gonna be all right?" she asked. David looked up at her and managed a smile. Eventually, after the diner, he walked. Miles of aimless wandering through neighborhoods he'd lived near but never really explored. He passed the park where he and Jennifer had their third date, the bookstore where he'd bought her favorite novel as a surprise, the restaurant where they'd celebrated her promotion. Every corner of the city was haunted by the ghost of what he thought they were building. He realized somewhere around mile 5 that he'd built his entire adult life around her. His friends were her friends. His routines accommodated her schedule. His apartment, his furniture, his plans, all of it had been architected around making Jennifer happy. By the time the sun began to set, David had made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called Marcus. "I need a favor," he said when Marcus picked up. "Anything, man. What do you need?" David took a breath. "I need to crash on your couch for a week while I find a new place, and I need you to help me move my stuff out of the apartment when Jennifer's at work." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Done." When? David looked at the sky, streaked with orange and pink, the kind of sunset Jennifer would have photographed and posted with some inspirational quote. "Tomorrow," he said. "I want to do it tomorrow." Marcus and his wife Amy were waiting when David arrived at their townhouse in the suburbs. Amy, 7 months pregnant and radiating the kind of contentment David had thought he was working toward, hugged him without asking questions. "The guest room is yours as long as you need it," she said. "We converted it to a nursery, but the couch pulls out and it's actually pretty comfortable." Marcus had already set up sheets and pillows, a small act of care that made David's throat tight. He dropped his duffel bag and sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with walking all day. "You want to talk about it?" Marcus asked, handing him a beer. David shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just need to keep moving forward." Marcus nodded, understanding in the way that old friends do. They sat in silence, drinking beer and watching a basketball game neither of them cared about, and David felt the first small flicker of something that might eventually become okay. He slept deeply that night, the kind of dreamless sleep that comes from emotional exhaustion. When he woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and he could hear Amy in the kitchen making breakfast. Over coffee, they planned the logistics. Marcus had already called in backup 2 guys from their old college crew who owed Marcus favors and wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions. Jennifer worked until 6 on Wednesdays, which gave them a 7-hour window. "What do you want to take?" Marcus asked. David thought about it. My books. My clothes. The desk from the office, I bought that before I met her. Everything else she can keep. He didn't want the furniture that carried memories. He didn't want the plates they'd picked out together or the coffee maker she'd insisted on. He wanted a clean break, surgical and complete. Wednesday morning, David stood outside the apartment building while Marcus kept watch. He'd timed it perfectly. Jennifer left at 8:45, right on schedule, wearing the coat he'd bought her for Christmas and carrying the bag he'd surprised her with for her birthday. She looked tired, he noticed from his position behind a parked car. Good. She should be tired. She'd spent 3 days trying to reach him, leaving increasingly frantic messages that oscillated between apologetic and accusatory. He'd read them all and responded to none. Words were meaningless now. Only actions mattered. Once her car disappeared around the corner, David signaled to Marcus and the crew. They moved with military efficiency boxes, tape, the hand truck Marcus had borrowed from his father-in-law. David walked through the apartment one last time, seeing it with new eyes. There, the couch where Jennifer had called him boring. There, the kitchen where he'd planned to make her breakfast after she said yes to his proposal. There, the bedroom where he'd left the ring and the note. The ring was gone, he noticed. The note remained, now crumpled, as if she'd read it multiple times trying to decode a message that was painfully simple. They worked in silence, packing up the pieces of David's life that existed independently of Jennifer. It was shocking how little there was. 5 years of cohabitation, and his actual belongings fit into 12 boxes and 3 pieces of furniture. Everything else belonged to her, or to the version of himself he'd created to make her happy. That David, the one who bought expensive gifts to compensate for his supposed boringness, who made himself small so she could shine, was being left behind with the throw pillows and the French press and the memories he no longer wanted. By 2 p.m., they were done. The apartment looked gutted in the specific places where David had existed: empty bookshelves, a gap where his desk had been, half the closet suddenly bare. Marcus loaded the last box into the U-Haul they'd rented while David stood in the doorway, keys in his hand. He should leave a note, some final word to mark the end. But there was nothing left to say. He'd said it all in that first message. I hope you find what makes you feel alive. He set the keys on the kitchen counter and walked out, pulling the door shut behind him with a finality that felt like closure. The storage unit Marcus had helped him rent was climate-controlled and depressingly impersonal, the kind of space where relationships went to die. They stacked the boxes in neat rows, David's entire pre-Jennifer and post-Jennifer existence reduced to a 10 by 10 concrete room. What now? Marcus asked when they finished. David looked at the boxes, at the furniture that would sit here until he figured out his next move. Now I figure out who I am without her, he said. It sounded dramatic, but it was the truth. He'd spent 5 years being Jennifer's boyfriend. He had no idea how to just be David. The next 2 months were a study in reconstruction. David threw himself into work with the intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. He took on the projects no one else wanted: the complex database migration, the client with impossible demands, the system architecture that required 80-hour weeks. His boss noticed. You angling for a promotion, Hayes? She asked one Friday evening when David was still at his desk at 9 p.m. Just trying to stay busy, he said honestly. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Well, whatever's motivating you, keep it up. The partners have noticed. He started running. Not jogging running, the kind of punishing early morning miles that left him too exhausted to think. He'd never been athletic, always been more comfortable with books than barbells, but there was something clarifying about physical pain. It was honest. It was measurable. It existed in the present moment, demanding nothing but endurance. By week 6, he'd run his first 10K. By week 8, he was signing up for a half marathon. His body changed, shedding the soft edges of contentment, revealing angles he'd forgotten he had. He also started saying no. When Vanessa texted asking if they could meet for coffee to clear the air, he declined. When Jennifer sent a long email explaining that she'd been going through something and wanted to work on us, he didn't respond. When mutual friends tried to play mediator, suggesting that he was being unreasonable and everyone deserved a second chance, he quietly removed them from his life. He was done explaining himself. Done making himself small to accommodate other people's comfort. Done being the safety net for someone who saw him as a last resort. 3 months after walking out, David signed a lease on a studio apartment in a neighborhood he'd always liked but Jennifer had deemed too grungy. It was small, affordable, and entirely his. He furnished it simply: the desk from storage, a bed from IKEA, bookshelves he assembled himself. No throw pillows, no decorative candles, no attempts to impress anyone. It was a space designed for living, not performing. The first night he spent there, eating takeout on the floor because his furniture hadn't been delivered yet, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Work continued to consume him, but now it was by choice rather than avoidance. The database migration he'd taken on was successful enough that the partners offered him a senior architect position with a 30% raise. David accepted without negotiation. The money meant options. It meant security that didn't depend on splitting rent or combining incomes. It meant freedom. He celebrated by buying himself the expensive espresso machine he'd always wanted but had never purchased because Jennifer thought it was frivolous. Every morning, he made himself a perfect cappuccino and drank it while watching the sunrise, a small ritual of self-care that felt revolutionary. For months in, he got a message from an unknown number. "David, this is Chloe. I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out. I wanted you to know that I think you did the right thing walking away. Jennifer was wrong about you. You're not boring, you're decent. And decent men are rare. I hope you're doing well." David stared at the message for a long time. Chloe had always been the anxious one, the people-pleaser who went along with the group to avoid conflict. For her to reach out took courage. He typed back, "Thanks, Chloe. That means more than you know. I'm doing better than I expected. I hope you're well too." Her response came quickly, "Can I be honest? Jennifer is a mess. She realized what she lost when you didn't come crawling back. She thought you'd fold within a week. Instead, you just disappeared. She's been dating around, trying to find that excitement she talked about. Turns out, exciting guys are usually just unstable guys." Who knew? David smiled grimly. He knew he shouldn't enjoy her misery, that taking pleasure in someone else's pain made him no better than the friends who'd laughed at his expense. But he was human, and humans, he'd learned, contain multitudes of contradictions. 5 months after the proposal that never happened, David was having drinks with colleagues when someone asked if he was seeing anyone. The question caught him off guard. He'd been so focused on rebuilding himself that dating hadn't even occurred to him. "No," he said, "just focusing on work and figuring out my own life." His colleague, a woman named Rachel from the design team, smiled. "Smart. Best relationships I've had started when I wasn't looking for them." Something about the way she said it made David look at her, really look, not just polite colleague eye contact. Rachel was smart, funny, and refreshingly direct. When she asked if he wanted to grab dinner sometime, not as a work thing but as a see-where-it-goes thing, David found himself saying yes. They went to a hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese place where the pho was incredible and the atmosphere was chaotic. Rachel talked about her work, her love of pottery, her terrible relationship with her ex that had ended 2 years ago. "I spent a year being angry," she said, "then another year being numb. And then one day I woke up and realized I was just myself again. It was the best feeling." David understood exactly what she meant. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't make grand declarations or promises. They just talked for 3 hours and went their separate ways with the understanding that they'd do it again. And they did once a week, then twice, then whenever their schedules allowed. Rachel didn't demand his constant attention. She didn't need him to prove his worth with expensive gifts or grand gestures. She just enjoyed his company, and he enjoyed hers. It was, David realized, the least complicated relationship he'd ever had. 6 months after leaving, David finally responded to Jennifer's last email. She'd sent it 2 weeks prior, a lengthy message that vacillated between self-justification and apology. She was sorry for what she'd said. She'd been scared of commitment. She'd made a mistake. She wanted to try again. She'd grown. She'd changed. She understood now what she'd lost. David read it 3 times, waiting to feel anger, sadness, regret. Instead, He felt only a distant sympathy for someone who still didn't understand that you can't unsay truth. He wrote back, "Jennifer, I appreciate you reaching out. I've thought a lot about what happened, and I've come to understand that you were honest that night in a way you'd never been with me before. You said you could do better than me, and you know what? You were right. You should do better. You should find someone who makes you feel alive, who excites you, who sets your pulse racing. You deserve that. And I deserve someone who doesn't see me as a safety net or a compromise. I deserve someone who chooses me first, not last. I wish you well. I really do. But we're done. Please don't contact me again." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 30 seconds later, his phone rang, Jennifer calling. He declined and blocked the number. Then he blocked her on social media, email, everything. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Some doors, once closed, needed to stay closed. His phone buzzed Rachel, texting to see if he wanted to catch a movie that weekend. David smiled and typed back yes. The past was finally where it belonged, behind him. And the future, uncertain as it was, suddenly felt like something worth moving toward. 8 months later, David was promoted to lead architect. 9 months later, he ran his first marathon. 10 months later, he and Rachel took a trip to Portland for a pottery convention that turned into the best vacation of his life. They wandered through vintage bookstores, ate at food trucks, laughed until his ribs hurt. One night, lying in their hotel room, Rachel turned to him and said, "I'm really glad I met you." David kissed her forehead. "I'm glad I met me too," he said. She laughed, understanding exactly what he meant. A year after the night he walked away, David was having coffee at the same diner where Dolores had told him he'd survive. She was still there, still refilling cups without being asked. She recognized him immediately. "You look better," she said. David glanced at his reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. He did look better, healthier, happier, present in a way he hadn't been before. "I am better," he said. "You were right. I survived." Dolores smiled. "Of course you did, honey. The good ones always do." He left her a generous tip and walked out into the spring morning. His phone buzzed a message from Marcus asking if he wanted to be the baby's godfather. David's heart swelled. "Yes," he typed back. "Absolutely yes." Life was full of small moments of joy he'd learned. You just had to be paying attention. You had to be present. You had to stop performing for someone else's approval and start living for your own peace. It sounded simple, but David had needed to lose everything to understand it. That evening, he met Rachel for dinner at a new restaurant she'd been wanting to try. They sat on the patio, sharing plates and talking about everything and nothing. At one point, she reached across the table and took his hand. "You know what I love about you?" she said. David raised an eyebrow. "My winning personality?" She laughed. "That too. But mainly, I love that you're just yourself. You don't try to be anything else. You're honest and kind and steady in the best possible way. You're exactly who you are, and you don't apologize for it." David felt something crack open in his chest, not pain, but release. For years, he'd thought his steadiness was a flaw, something to compensate for or disguise. Jennifer had made him feel like reliability was boring, like consistency was a character defect. But Rachel saw those same qualities and valued them. She didn't want a wolf. She wanted a partner. She wanted someone who showed up. And David, for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt like that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. "I used to think being steady was boring," he admitted. Rachel shook her head. "Steady is underrated. Steady means I don't have to wonder if you'll be there tomorrow. It means I can trust you with the truth. It means we can build something real instead of just chasing excitement." She paused, squeezing his hand. "Excitement fades, David. But steady? Steady lasts. And lasting is its own kind of magic." He wanted to tell her about Jennifer, about the night that had broken him open and forced him to rebuild. But there would be time for those stories. Right now, he just wanted to be here in this moment with this woman who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. They stayed at the restaurant until it closed, talking under the string lights while the city hummed around them. When they finally left, Rachel looped her arm through his. "Walk me home?" she asked. David smiled. "Always," he said. They walked through the cooling night, past the places that used to hurt to see, past the memories that had lost their power to wound. The city was the same, but David was different. He'd walked through fire and come out forged into something stronger, something that couldn't be diminished by someone else's inability to see his worth. A year and a half after the proposal that never happened, David received a wedding invitation in the mail. He didn't recognize the names at first. The ornate script was difficult to read. Then it clicked: Jennifer and someone named Tyler. The wedding was in 3 months. There was no personal note, just the formal invitation and a reply card. David stared at it for a long moment, then dropped it in the recycling bin without a second thought. Her story was no longer his story. He wished her well, truly, but he had no interest in being an audience to her next chapter. 2 years after walking away, David proposed to Rachel. Not with a ring he'd spent months agonizing over, but with a simple question asked on a Tuesday morning over coffee. "I want to spend my life with you," he said. "What do you think?" Rachel, covered in clay from her morning pottery session, laughed and said yes. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony with people who actually knew them, who celebrated them, who understood that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up every single day and choosing each other. On his wedding day, getting ready in the small room behind the venue, Marcus asked him if he ever thought about how different his life would be if Jennifer had said yes. David considered it. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not with regret. More with relief. If she'd said yes, I'd be married to someone who saw me as a consolation prize. Instead, I'm marrying someone who sees me as the grand prize. That's not a trade-off. That's an upgrade." Marcus grinned. "Damn right it is. Now let's get you married." David walked down the aisle. They decided to walk toward each other, meeting in the middle, and saw Rachel waiting for him. She was wearing a simple dress, no veil, just flowers in her hair, and a smile that could power cities. When they met at the center, she whispered, "Ready for steady?" He laughed. "Ready for everything," he said. And he was, not because the past didn't hurt, but because he'd learned that pain was just the price of transformation. You didn't get to become who you were meant to be without first surviving who you thought you had to be. Years later, when people asked David about his first engagement, he'd tell them the truth. It was the best thing that never happened. Walking away from someone who didn't value him had taught him to value himself. Losing what he thought he wanted had made space for what he actually needed. And in the end, that night he'd stood in the storage closet listening to Jennifer dismiss him as boring. That night had been the beginning of his real life. Not the life he'd planned, not the life he'd thought he wanted, but the life he deserved, filled with steady love, honest partnership, and the quiet magic of being chosen by someone who saw all of him and stayed. Thank you for watching all the way through. There's another story to your left screen. You'll enjoy it more than this one.